Good evening, everyone. Let's begin. I'm Lucy Birmingham, your MC for this evening. Welcome to Meet the Press. We have Meet the Press events just about every other month. It's your opportunity to connect with our fantastic journalists and talk with them. What we're going to have this evening is about 30, 40-minute talk. And and then a Q&A, and then we'll have the buffet dinner afterwards so that you can network with Steve. Anyway, let me introduce him properly. We are very, very honored to have as our guest this evening the award-winning veteran news reporter and broadcast foreign correspondent, Steve Herman. Steve is now the Southeast Asia Bureau Chief and Correspondent for Voice of America in Bangkok. Please give him a warm welcome.
Okay.
Anyway, so I just wanted to add that I remember meeting Steve when he was the FCCJ president from 1997 to 1998. He was with CBS Radio and Discovery Channel at that time, and I was a big fan of his work, but unfortunately I didn't have a chance to really get to know him. Then years later, recently in 2013, he very, very kindly introduced me to the Overseas Press Club in New York City. And I was just amazed at the breadth, the width of his contacts. Are you still on the OPC Board of Governors?
Yes. Just
wow.
This year.
Oh, okay. And he's also on the executive committee of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. Wow. Okay. And before that, you were president of the Seoul Foreign Correspondents Club.
Right.
From 2012?
Just 1 year.
Okay.
That was enough.
Wow. And then the chairman of the Foreign Press in Japan from 1998 to 2002. So that was like 5 years, right? In Asia, Steve's radio, TV, and web reporting has taken him to Thailand, now, of course, Korea, Japan, India, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, the Maldives, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and many other locations. He has covered every major news story in the Asian region, right? Probably.
I don't know.
Just about. I'm saying it. And he just told me that he's been covering the earthquakes in Kumamoto as well, the recent one. Yeah. Before all this, he was a documentary and interstitial, which I need interstitial TV program producer, if you could explain what that is later, as well as a columnist for about 20 years in the U.S. and Japan. So please take it from here.
Thank you, Lucy. And over the years, I've been in your seat introducing people and moderating events, and I'm much more comfortable doing that than doing this. And when I was actually asked to do this, I thought, well, why me? I think most people in the club know me pretty well. I joined the club in the early 1990s, I guess, and then was on the board for a number of years and president 97, 98, as Lucy mentioned. So I'm much more comfortable with a script as both a moderator and a broadcast journalist, although a lot of what I'm going to talk about tonight is really about going off script, literally and figuratively. And it's sort of like reporting without a safety net, because when you write a story, you've got your text, your copy, it's going through editors. When you're on the air doing a TV package or a radio report, it's all scripted except for those times when we're doing those live Q&As and you have news anchors ask you these really crazy questions that sometimes aren't related to what you're talking about. And then you've got to figure out, oh, what do I say? You can't say, well, that's a pretty stupid question. So tonight, I'll leave ample time for what I'm sure will be very good questions, and hopefully I will be able to give some answers that make sense. And you know, there are some people in this club who have been on the scene for decades beyond my 40-year span in journalism. And yes, I've been around that long. I should have more gray hair or less hair, I guess. But it's going gray quickly in recent years, I can tell you, with the switch from analog to digital. But others have witnessed a lot more impressive change in technology during their careers than I have. So I'm not going to reminisce about the good old days because, you know, they really weren't all that good, and there's a lot of things about the old days that I do not miss at all, such as dealing with teletype circuits in third world countries going amok when you're trying to file a story, or developing 16mm film just minutes before the last flight to London is departing. I'm very happy that era is behind us. So rather, I thought I'd focus on some things that would be useful for those struggling from analog to digital, which many would argue should already be complete in the year 2016. And, you know, this isn't only happening with journalism, it's happening with practically every field out there. So even if you're not a journalist, I hope that some of what I'm speaking about will also be relevant as well. You know, we're in an era where we have newspapers that still seem to be beholden to newsprint rather than figuring out a profitable scheme relying on electrons instead of continuing to kill more spruce trees. You may have heard National Public Radio in the United States recently vexed producers in the audience by refusing to promote podcasts on the air, lest that anger the affiliated stations on which the networks rely on for licensing of their programs. TV news programs are reluctant to stream on Facebook Live or YouTube for much the same reason, undermining the network affiliate relation which has proved so profitable since the days of black and white transmissions. Well, for the individual journalists such as myself, a sizable audience can now be reached without relying on what some would regard as an increasingly archaic infrastructure. With my smartphone, I can stream instantly on Facebook Live or YouTube, which I have been doing. And some of you may know that I'm quite active on Twitter. If you're on Twitter and you're not following me, please follow me at W7VOA, and there's extra points if you can figure out why I originally took this Twitter handle of W7VOA. Yes, it does have something to do with VOA, but that's not all. I also publish all my stories, my VOA stories, on LinkedIn, and I'm able to get them up on LinkedIn frequently before they get onto our own website. Journalists and news organizations are also distributing stories online: WhatsApp, Kakao Talk, Snapchat, and a host of other popular and emerging social platforms. And the reaction on these platforms, it's interactive and it's instantaneous. There's no need any longer to send in a letter to the editor and wait for a week for it to be published in the newspaper and maybe get a response or maybe not from the person who wrote the story or an editor. Already, the majority of journalists in the developed world are saying that they cannot carry on their work without social media. And half of those surveyed have replied that these tools are, quote, indispensable to their work. And I would agree. Despite its bad publicity and falling stock price of late, Twitter continues to be the most popular social networking channel for journalists, followed by Facebook. How many of you have Facebook accounts? I'm just curious. Okay. How many have Twitter accounts? Oh, wow. Okay, pretty impressive. Well, cautionary note, Twitter, and I hate to say this as a very loyal Twitter person, but Twitter appears to be less effective than Facebook. Twitter generates 1.5% of traffic for typical news organizations, according to social analytics company Parse.ly, which examined data from 200 of its client websites over 2 weeks this January. More than a third of journalists who use social media to find stories and reply to comments about their work or monitor their beats using social media. While my number of followers on social media, a little bit more than 40,000, and I also have about 40,000 on LinkedIn, while that may seem notable, the tally still does not match the potential reach that I have through my employer on Facebook, which is VOA News, which I want to pull up here. And of course, I highly recommend that you follow VOA on Facebook as well, because we are doing some very interesting things. So you can see here, you're actually getting you're getting a peek at the admin page, because I have admin rights on the Facebook page. So this is stuff that's not on the public page. So 3.2 million likes, 73,000 have been added this week, 33 million post reach for this week. And yeah, on the right-hand side, you'll see over here, there are 404 videos that have been posted and I don't know what, 12 website clicks. So it is enormous when I'm able to go on to basically hijack our Facebook page and put out stuff on there, because I have a built-in audience literally of millions of people just on this platform. But I have to say, from my Twitter account, I do notice much more engagement than I do from traditional media, radio and television. And occasionally my tweets do go viral, and that's thanks to being retweeted by other followers, and I'm fortunate to have some very prominent followers who have a much bigger reach. Queen Noor from Jordan, who has 614,000 followers, she'll retweet some of my stuff once in a while. And then, of course, I like having Queen Noor as a follower, but I think it's really cool that Bianca Jagger follows me on Facebook or on Twitter. Doesn't mean I can get a date with her, though. And one thing that I've realized, that the quality of your followers on social media is more important than the quantity. So don't get so obsessed about how many followers you have, but rather who your followers are. And there are some people on Twitter, some media figures, who enjoy the best of both worlds. They have both quantity and quality followers. Anderson Cooper, for example, is almost at 7.5 million. I don't think that quite beats out Katy Perry. Is she like tops now on Twitter? She's got to be up there, 86.9 million. I mean, that's, I know, regardless of what you think of her music, but that is an impressive social media presence. Well, I think the day is not far off when some journalists, because of the number of individual followers that they have on social media, can become distribution platforms unto themselves, eliminating the need for a traditional employer. And I'll offer one scenario, which some may consider sacrilegious, actually, but it has a precedent. If you recall the early days of broadcasts, maybe not in Japan, where it was probably only NHK in black and white for many years, but in the United States, we had NBC News and the Camel News Caravan, where you had the anchorman on camera smoking the brand of choice. And I think many high-profile digital journalists will become independent and will rely on sponsors for income, because if you're doing it professionally, you've got to make money somewhere. Well, maybe you don't want to have a cigarette company sponsor you, although in Japan there's lots of people who smoke and they may not have any qualms about being sponsored by Mild 7 or Marlboro. But for others, maybe they may or may not want to hook up with an oil company, but what about an insurance company? Seems fairly mundane compared to some of the other alternatives out there. And some people would say it sure beats not having a paycheck or at all or unemployment. Well, there was a little bit of an inkling of this that first erupted around the year 2005. Does anybody remember Kevin Seitz? S-I-T-E-S. He was hired by Yahoo News. Yahoo's about to get a new owner any day, fortunately. But Yahoo hired him back in 2005 to be a backpack journalist and go all around the world. And I think the goal they had was to report on every active war that was going on. And of course, you were supposed to tune in and watch and see whether Kevin would get shot or not, presumably. Well, sadly, the trend has not been towards hiring more Kevin Seitz. Rather, the demand now seems to be for so-called reporters to sit in newsrooms, repurposing content of other journalists and publishers to create listicles or slap such content together with a sensationalistic headline. You've all heard of BuzzFeed, but there's also, in my part of the world, down in Southeast Asia, an up-and-coming firm is called Coconuts Media. Anybody heard of Coconuts? Okay. And they launched in 2011 in focusing on Bangkok. They claim that they've got 1.1 million users per month in Thailand. They launched another site 2012 in Manila, 2013 in Singapore, and in Hong Kong also in 2013, KL 2014, Jakarta 2014, Bali. What a great job, right? Just reporting on Bali. Yangon, Rangoon in March of last year, Krung Thep, and Indonesia's site up in May of 2015. I'm not a huge fan of Coconuts, although I can see that this may be a very viable business model because they're mainly repurposing other people's content and they're sort of scant credit. Maybe in the 4th or 5th paragraph, they'll say where they got the material from, but basically they're just going on the web and rewriting other people's content. Although they, in all fairness, they do have some original content. And of course, they're trying to attract advertisers. And if you go on their webpage, you'll see all this wonderful stuff about how they're reaching 14.6 million people per month, blah, blah, blah. But at least Coconuts, what they're reporting is real. There are other platforms out there that have no compunction about inventing stories. And I'm not talking about Onion, which is a wonderful satire site, and it should be obvious to anyone looking at Onion that it is satire, although a number of foreign news organizations, I think even Xinhua has been burned by picking up Onion stories, and perhaps they deserve so. But has anybody heard about this site, National Report? Trump University offers Sarah Palin honorary degree in climate science. Some people might get the pun in that headline there. But this is all made up. Looks real. Looks pretty real, right? Totally made up. America's #1 independent news source. There's also a site I'll bring up here. Hopefully it's okay for mixed company. Hustlers. Anybody been to this site? I mean, great funny stuff to read, right? Washington, D.C. man breaks into Five Guys Burgers, makes himself cheeseburger. Basically made up news. Doesn't matter. They don't care whether it's true or not. The head of National Report, no, I'm not going to like that site, told BuzzFeed that he began faking news as a way, quote, to seed information into right-wing blogs, displaying how hungry they were to create controversy. but he now sees it as a broader commentary on the media in general. He said, quote, "Where are you getting your other information if one of your stories that you pulled is straight fiction?" And he was referring to a New York Times editorial which linked to one of his fake stories. Speaking of BuzzFeed, several Japanese journalists I know have gone to work for BuzzFeed Japan, which is now one of 11 international editions of BuzzFeed and is the 6th language. And anybody who's looked at BuzzFeed Japan? Who likes BuzzFeed Japan? Okay. But, you know, some people say maybe the future of news in Japan too. Definitely different than NHK. Well, we all know that Japan is one of the most digital countries, but mainstream media still dominates here. And I know the issue of government pressure on the Japanese media oligarchies was a topic of a recent club panel and was also addressed here earlier today in remarks made by the UN Special Rapporteur David Kaye. Now, my first exposure to media in Japan was in 1990. I was a morning newscaster at Japan Cable Television. I succeeded a guy named John Lewis, who became the first CNN correspondent here. And TV Asahi, at that time, 1981, I'm sorry, not 1990, I should have said 1981, graciously found space for John in the JCTV building in Roppongi Rokchome, a space that I recall appeared to have previously been used as a broom closet. Well, when cable channels began to proliferate in Japan, you know, me and a lot of other people here hoped that news coverage by Japanese media would change. Lamentably, that didn't happen, and the oligarchies ended up controlling all the new channels as well. So when digital media and the internet emerged here, I was much more subdued about making any predictions of revolution. And despite the emergence of a myriad of alternatives in the Japanese language, not much indeed appears to have changed, as everybody in this room knows. And I spent years, as Lucy noted, after I was FCCJ president, I was president, or Kaicho actually is the title for the Zainichi Gaikoku Kyokai, which is the pooling organization, foreign press in Japan. And I spent years pressing for greater access to ministries for the foreign media. And I was looking through some archives for FPIJ, Zainichi Gaikoku Kyokai, from the mid-1960s when Sam Jameson had been the chairman. And I was somewhat bemused to read these documents, and I could have used them again word for word. We were still fighting the same battle in the late 1990s. And things really didn't start to change at all in this country until David Butts led the Bloomberg team into the Keisha Club at the Tokyo Stock Exchange to demand corporate earning announcements at the same time they were being handed out to the Keisha Club members. The Keisha Club thought David brash. After all, the Keisha Club had generously allowed Bloomberg to set up a desk in the hall outside of the inner sanctum and generously gave them the same reports a mere 10 minutes after they had been distributed to Kyodo and Nikkei. Well, for some reason, David was not happy with that. And as we all know, a 10-minute delay when you're dealing with financial news is an eternity, right? So nowadays, we have information that's being distributed to everyone at the same time on Twitter, and so you really have to wonder what is the relevancy anymore of the Keisha Club system. And it's not just a Japanese phenomena, by the way. I spent 3 years reporting from Seoul, and they're called Kijadan there. And I guess it probably came from Japan, right? Because the Korean media was essentially set up by the Japanese in the early 20th century. So by now you've probably detected a bias in my remarks, which is an emphasis on speed and my preference for platforms such as Twitter, both as a news gathering tool and distribution. Speed, essentially the coverage of breaking news, however, seems to be passé with a lot of so-called news organizations. CNN is no longer the first word for most breaking news stories. The emphasis seems much more on chat shows and packaged reality programming. And even the Associated Press, AP, who I used to work for, has made a corporate decision to focus more on analysis and contextual pieces than trying to be first. And I've discussed this with my friend and Tokyo Bureau Chief Ken Moritsugu, and I do find it a bit lamentable. Back in the day when AP and UPI competed head-to-head, and getting something big on the AP wire minutes ahead of our rivals meant a herogram from headquarters because it benefited the subscribers and the public. There was competition and choice. I am fortunate because in my office I can monitor AP, Reuters, AFP in real time because VOA subscribes to all of them. And I really do feel that because we try to still rely on double sourcing, that the lack of competition is something to be seriously worried about. Of course, we can try to find out firsthand whether something or not is happening, but that's the purpose of subscribing to the wire services so that you don't have to have someone everywhere in the world. I know it's a business decision, and with the decline of newspapers, the wires are finding that video is now more profitable. But how will they compete when live streams on Facebook and other platforms are becoming seemingly ubiquitous from every corner of the globe? And I wanted to pull up to show you an example that at VOA, our Burmese service is now streaming its nightly newscast over YouTube and Facebook. We don't need a cable broadcaster. People don't need to have a satellite dish. They can just, if they have a phone and a connection to 3G at least, they're watching the newscast live. And the numbers, I was in Naypyidaw a month ago watching the Burmese service newscast, and this had just been launched, but there were about 8,000 people watching it live in real time over Facebook. And I've recently used my iPhone to stream ad-lib video reports on Facebook's, the main page on VOA. I had tried to call that up here, but I've lost it. But you can get the idea. We're putting up these Facebook Live and customized Facebook reports. Here's one, for example. This one was posted a few hours ago. It's already had 18,000 views and has reached 71,000 people. And these are little 30-second videos that are not narrated. There's no reporter. You can see there's just some subtitles placed on there, and there's a lot of engagement. Again, is this of great news value? That's debatable. You know, there are some of the traditional news organizations that are successfully managing the transition. The Economist, which began in 1843, surviving. Atlantic Monthly, which began 14 years after The Economist, has a significant digital presence. New York Times, Wall Street Journal in the United States seem to be doing fine. Europe, bit of a different story. Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung subscribers still account for 70% of the paid circulation. And then, of course, you know, The Guardian has been closely watched. They have launched editions in Australia and North America. And I get a lot of news about Australia now from The Guardian, not from one of the native news sites. And Guardian's already claiming more than 120 million unique browser visits every month. So one thing is some of the top tiers, the quality names, are surviving. And then, as we've discussed, some of the bottom feeders, which are new, are also doing really well because they're able to attract advertisers, even if their content is not very reputable. Anyway, I don't think very many of us in this room are aspiring to be publishers in the traditional sense, but rather looking, if you're a journalist, to save your own skin. And you have to ponder that we may really have to rely on our wits to continue earning money as journalists. So what do we do? Yes, becoming our own brand for some of us who can generate a significant social media following and acquire some sort of patronage in the future is an option. Many others will decide that economics no longer makes sense or fail to find any job in journalism whatsoever. There's a thriving site on Facebook for such journalists. It's called What's Your Plan B, which has, as of this evening, 7,611 members. And, you know, there's a realization that digital sites, in common with their .com brethren, are preferring young blood who will work long hours without complaint for various modest wages. But you look at what the job descriptions are, and they're wanting social media skills. They're wanting employees that are more familiar with JavaScript than, say, how to use a semicolon. Journalism schools, I think, are finally starting to evolve, and they're teaching web coding, informatics, graphic design. I don't have any objection to that. I think it's great for young journalists to be savvy in data visualization skills, but hopefully they're also still being taught how to write. My larger concern is what is now termed news literacy, that people cannot figure out that National Report is a fake site. They see it on Facebook, somebody sends it to them on WhatsApp, and they believe it's true. And I'm astonished by the lack of critical thinking skills, even in advanced Western countries. Research has long shown that some percentage of the population cannot recall frequently whether a particular piece of information came from a news story or a commercial. So if they're not able to separate that, how are they going to figure out whether something like National Report is fake or not? Rumors, hoaxes, staged videos, the most ridiculous conspiracy theories, all are spreading instantly and somewhat credibly, much to the chagrin of news professionals. The worst thing the internet has done, in my opinion, is to turn the digital natives into the digital naive. Everyone should be able to evaluate credibility for information that they encounter, and I think that this is essential for democracies. Journalists and journalistic organizations have a responsibility as well. We have to remain relevant to our audiences and reach them wherever they're at. For the younger demographic, that destination is no longer a newspaper, nor is it a 30-minute evening newscast on a terrestrial TV channel. What's intriguing to me is that according to a survey by the Pew Charitable Trust across all age groups, the top categories for news interest in this digital era are crime, local community, and health. That's fairly encouraging. Sports and local government round out the top 5. International news ranks 9th, but it's still ahead of entertainment. But what do we see a lot of on our social media feeds? That's driving numbers. It's entertainment. Theoretically, all of these other topics that I just mentioned should do better than entertainment. Perhaps the best assessment of entertainment reporting was made by Frank Zappa, who said those writing about his profession were people who could not write, interviewing people who could not talk for people who could not read. Surveys also show that the consumers, regardless of their level of apparent literacy, are not appreciating the fire hose approach of the online media and its randomness. They do want filtering, and the ability to search is important. So this sort of randomness that's being chosen by algorithms up on Facebook, I think it's a very mixed blessing. So the gatekeeper role is still desired. Both traditional and new media can still be portals in this era. But how for us to remain relevant? So I'll end on a quote from a guy from the 19th century, Edgar Allan Poe. He said, "We now demand the light artillery of the intellect. We need the curt, the condensed, the pointed, the readily diffused, in place of the verbose, the detailed, the voluminous, the inaccessible." Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That's fascinating. All right. Okay, so let's open up the floor to questions. Does anybody have a question? This is your chance to ask. Probably, I mean.
Or if you disagreed with anything
Yeah.
I said, I'd love to hear it.
Yes. Yeah, go ahead. Yes, Steve.
Yeah, there's a mic coming to you. Yeah.
Could you possibly briefly recount the Bangkok Erawan temple explosion? And I think that you were somewhere nearby with your periscope already loaded. I mean, to
Yeah.
me, this is very exciting. I want to hear it.
Yeah, I was trying to find the periscope stuff, which was what was very interesting about that was I went out there with my phone, and we arrived on the scene not knowing what we were going to find, and I had a videographer with me, and while he was shooting, I just started going out, doing my thing on Periscope. I didn't even know if I was going to have a good connection. Fortunately, we had a 3G connection. It was very risky because tens of thousands of people started to watch this thing. And I was worried about showing stuff that I would not want to show on television, like body parts. Unbeknownst to me, while I was streaming, and I think this may have been the first time that this has happened, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation picked up my Periscope stream and put it live on their evening newscast. They didn't ask, but it was okay. But that was, I thought, a huge risk for them because who knows what I could have been showing on Periscope. What happened was, because I was showing this live and I was out there, remember, we didn't have to set up a live truck, we didn't have to set up a flyaway pack, satellite, boom, we were there. And the video didn't look great. But I was actually asked by several networks, CNN, I went on CNN, NBC, and then CBS Evening News in the United States asked me to do, as a VOA reporter, a full TV package, which is, I mean, has never happened before. So I actually have this here, and you can watch it.
Responsibility for a powerful bomb blast today at a religious shrine in Bangkok, Thailand. At least 18 people were killed, more than 100 wounded. Voice of America reporter Steve Herman was among the first on the scene.
The blast went off in the heart of the popular central shopping district during dinner hour. This surveillance video from the moment of the explosion shows people being knocked to the ground, others scrambling for safety. We arrived shortly after to a grisly scene. Bodies littered the pavement at a Hindu shrine, many of them shredded from the force of the blast. Rescue workers scrambled to help the wounded. Motorcycles were scorched and relegated to clumps of twisted metal. One bystander was shaken by what he had witnessed.
I saw more than 5 dead body inside the shrine, and then I even see some piece of the body separating all around the places.
The damage appeared to be the result of a single pipe bomb wrapped in cloth placed at the base of the historic shrine, a landmark popular with tourists and Buddhist Thai worshippers. The military junta is urging calm and vowing to hunt down those responsible for an attack officials say was clearly intended to damage the kingdom's lucrative tourism industry. Since last year's military coup, Bangkok has been relatively calm, although there has been political tension. The military junta says elections are not going to be held until at least 2017. Charlie?
Thanks, Steve Herman of Voice of America.
Okay, so that was sort of encapsulates what we went through, but the key to that was really getting that video out from the scene in raw form. And one thing you'll notice is obviously, while the quality has gotten pretty good on these iPhones, and you can do, there's 4G now and HD and all that, if you have the proper bandwidth. The quality is not the most important thing. It is the immediacy. So chances are you're going to come across something at some point that's going to be of news value. And you can pop out your phone and start rolling video, and with the push of a button, you know, Periscope was the flavor of the month, I think, last year, the last 12 months. But now that Facebook has opened up its live streaming app, I think it's for everybody now, right, on the iPhone platform. The other thing they're about to do is allow Facebook live streaming from PCs. So what that's going to mean is all the local newscasts in different countries will start streaming their newscasts onto Facebook Live. And other people will start creating video content to stream on Facebook Live. And the power, I cannot underestimate the power of Facebook. It is by far the most robust media platform for live video streaming. YouTube is there as well, but people don't hang out on YouTube the way that they hang out on Facebook. More people are just on Facebook for a lot of other reasons. You're messaging on Facebook, you're looking at your friends' feed, you're looking at accounts that you follow. So now, I don't know, and Facebook's not paying me for saying all this, right? But 2 years from now, there could be some new platform. Maybe somebody buys Yahoo tomorrow, Verizon, and resurrects Yahoo News live video or something. Anything's possible. But it does go to show you that, you know, you look at these media companies and they have billions and billions of dollars to throw at this stuff. Microsoft wasn't able to figure it out. Google, okay, YouTube, but Google Plus totally failed as a social media platform. Facebook's hot right now, and they have enough money when somebody comes up like Snapchat, just go buy it, right? So and I remember, you know, how many people remember AOL, okay? You know, that was the thing. And then Yahoo for years, everybody used Yahoo Mail and Yahoo News. So just because some platform's on top right now, doesn't mean it's going to be on top forever. But I would say Facebook right now is in a really, really strong position because of both the overt and casual interactions that they're doing with existing media players. Yeah. Yes.
Quite interesting presentation. You've been talking about the various. You've been talking about the various tools, you know, of new journalism and all of that. I would like to know if you have any reflection about the audiences that you are reaching. You know, when it's a crisis, of course, you do a stand-up. To who are you talking about, and what are these audiences, you know, that are moving or whatsoever? Very different from the analog broadcast.
Yeah, I think some things have changed and some things have not. I think in the past, you knew that your audience was more passive. They were sitting down on the sofa watching the television, or they were in the kitchen making dinner, listening to the radio. There wasn't interaction with the audience. Now, if you go on Periscope, there's immediate interaction. Facebook Live, people will start firing questions at you. So the audience is really engaged. To me, though, I don't think it's changed in the sense that I'm not thinking, well, you know, there's potentially 1 million people seeing this right now. We're always taught, talk to one person, right? Focus on an individual. So I think that still stays the same. What is different on my Twitter feed, for example, that you know, I can interact with the audience 3 ways. I can, if they're following me and I'm following them, I can send them direct messages. That's over on the right-hand column here. Hopefully there's nothing sensitive and private. No, I don't think so. And then in the middle are notifications, other people that are mentioning me, and I can communicate with them this way. And then on the left hand is everybody I'm following, and that stuff is coming up in real time. So I think for some people who were used to the old analog way where I'm talking to you, okay, it's a one-way communication. This in-your-face interaction can be very overwhelming. Yes, as a user of social media, you're getting hit with a fire hose of information, but I'm also getting hit with a fire hose of feedback, and some people have gotten just totally fed up with, like, Twitter because of comments that have been directed at them. And audiences can be merciless, and people have found this out. There's a lot of bullying that goes on in social media. I think sometimes it is really uncalled for, but other times I think those who are being targeted have to share in the responsibility because they went beyond just being objective journalist. And there's a lot of people out there, including journalists, who are making very provocative or partisan comments. So if you're going to dish that out, you better be prepared for it to come back at you. So because I work for Voice of America, we have a very strict code of conduct. I will not say things on Twitter that I would not say on one of our television programs, and I will avoid direct commentary. Sometimes I may kind of put in a sort of subtle, funny comment, but I'm extremely careful to make sure that something that I'm saying is not going to cause offense or can be taken the wrong way, because it's not only my reputation, my image that's on the line, it's that of my entire news organization. So it's changed in some ways, and it has not changed in other ways. I'm still focusing on the one person out there. VOA, we're in a kind of a unique situation. Our target is not North America. Our target is not the United States. It's generally the developing world. We have 45 language services. We tend to serve countries and languages where there's not a free press, or the media is not very sophisticated or developed. So for me, my mission's a little bit clearer. I think for some people, it's a little bit more confusing, but if you're working for Vice or BuzzFeed, they want you to be deliberately provocative. That's part of the game. So I'm much more of a traditional analog reporter that's transitioned into this, but I'm trying to keep the same values. And what's changed is that I have an immediate reaction with my audience, which I didn't have before. Yeah, hopefully that answered it.
Any other questions? Yes, please. Yeah.
Two questions. I might very much be out of history, but my impression of VOA was that it was Radio Moscow, USA. And could you explain to me what VOA is right now, and what sort of whether the U.S. to what extent the U.S. government's opinions and so on are sort of reflected in VOA? That's one. The second one is regarding what's this thing? News literacy, which. Recently, I had an occasion to, an American friend of mine actually sent me a fake news, which said that in Chicago you were allowed to rent guns. And it sounded very realistic to me because, and then he kind of, and I said, God, this is crazy. And then he said, well, look, this is Chicago, where gun control laws are very strict, and so they were trying to spoof that thing. And for somebody who doesn't know the intricacies of American state gun laws, these news can become very true.
Sure. Right.
And you can't sort of know everything about the world. And so how do you sort of get this news literacy up on, or when you try to get that thing up?
Right. Okay, two great questions. To partly answer the first one, I just happen to have something we can look at here, although it won't come up full screen for some reason.
This is a voice speaking from America.
VOA exports America's most powerful product, freedom of speech. Accurate reporting, reliable reporting, balanced reporting.
Can an election be possible?
Content you can trust, a U.S. bureau you can partner with.
З Вашингтону на події в Україні.
VOA informs and inspires with unparalleled access. In parts of the world, information is scarce and oppression real. VOA, sharing a voice that says, we report the truth. VOA, sharing America's voice with the world.
Okay, I'll more specifically answer your question. VOA is 100% owned and operated by the United States government. 100% of the funding comes from the U.S. government. We also have a charter that was enacted in the Ford administration, so about 1976, which puts a firewall between any administration and the journalistic aspect of VOA. So the White House cannot direct VOA's reporting. We were once under the State Department, under what was called the U.S. Information Agency. For many, many years, we have been under an independent apparatus called the Broadcasting Board of Governors. The board is appointed by the president. The board must be half Republican, half Democrat. The Secretary of State serves as an ex officio officer of the board. I am a former reporter for the Associated Press, been in this business for 40 years, as I said. I had no problem whatsoever about going to work for VOA. And I have never had anyone at VOA say to me, you must do this story, or you cannot do this story, or you must spin this a certain way, or you cannot mention this in your story. If that had ever happened, I would quit. I can't foresee it happening with the way that VOA is structured now. There are editorials that are broadcast by VOA, and they are put on the website. And those editorials do reflect the views of the United States government. Just as a publisher in a certain town might be a Republican or a Democrat and say, I'm supporting Donald Trump, or I'm supporting Hillary Clinton for president, and here's why. So there is that aspect to it. We are different than, you may be familiar with Radio Free Asia, Radio Free Europe, which are also funded by the U.S. government. They're not part of the government. They're designed to be what are called surrogate broadcasters. In Laotian or Bulgarian, they were meant to replace the local news broadcasters to primarily give news about those countries in their language, because it was not possible for reporters in those countries to do that sort of reporting anymore. When people say, oh, VOA propaganda, I say, go watch our stories, read our stories on the web, and then see if you're detecting any particular kind of consistent bias or propaganda. We are, admittedly, if we're talking about soft power, public diplomacy, I do see, and VOA acknowledges, and the U.S. government acknowledges, that VOA is an instrument of American soft power, just as Hollywood can also be an instrument of American soft power. And I think that this has become more critical than ever, because if you go and watch Russia Today or CCTV, you will after watching it for a while, you will detect certain patterns of stories that are not being covered or covered a certain way. Are we perfect? No. Do we make mistakes? Yes. Is there perhaps sometimes some kind of bias that creeps into our reporting? Perhaps, but I think you can also argue that of CNN or the New York Times or Washington Post. We're human beings, and the staff correspondents are Americans, but we have 45 language services, and we probably have the most diverse staff of any news organization in the world, because we have native speakers from 45 different languages who probably come from more than 100 countries. That's the answer to that, and if anybody has more questions, always happy to talk about that, especially when we're schmoozing, having dinner. News literacy, because we're kind of short on time, this is something that I've become very, very interested in recently, and I would urge you to check out places such as the Center for News Literacy, the State University of New York at Stony Brook has really gotten into this topic, and I think that they probably have the largest program that is devoted to teaching news literacy. But to me, it is just as an important a topic as teaching journalists how to report, is teaching the public how to use critical thinking skills, as they say, to judge the reliability and credibility of news reports and news sources. And this School of Journalism at Stony Brook is the only one of its kind in the United States. They're teaching 10,000 undergraduates from all academic disciplines. They're talking about launching programs abroad. Knight Foundation's been funding this. I think this is so important, and I hope that in other countries that we see similar things pop up. I'm not an expert on this. I'm learning more about how to teach news literacy myself and become more of a evangelist for this particular topic, because if there's no news literacy, then me explaining about how VOA is different than Russia Today or CCTV or Onion isn't really going to make any difference. Why split hairs if nobody can see the hairs in the first place, right? Does that answer it? Okay, we can talk more about it. Yeah.
Steve, I just wanted to ask something on that,
Sure.
because I also agree that it's incredibly important. And is it fair to say that there should be some sort of a government agency or some sort of a public controlling, like, for instance, National Report? That's fake, determining these publications.
Well, I mean, I work for a government broadcaster, but I'm also hesitant about the government getting into media oversight. In some countries you do. In the UK, you've got, what is it, called the Press Council. It's supposed to be a voluntary thing involving the different news organizations, but there are governments that do get involved in this. But the problem is it's a double-edged sword, right?
Right. But how about like an association? Is there some sort of an association in the United States that can determine these? Which is fake and which is real?
Well, but you have professional organizations. Society for Professional Journalists has a column called Darts and Laurels where they'll point out bad reporting. But I think it's so egregious these days that you almost have to give up. And it's, it would be like policing traffic violations in New Delhi, where I used to live. It's almost infinite. So I don't know what the answer is. I think and I hope that the answer lies in educating the public in news literacy. And I'm a very strong First Amendment person. So if something stands up to the test of the First Amendment, people should be free to publish. And we've had this problem in the United States, false reporting, going back to the time of the American Revolution. And if you publish false reporting, eventually there will be a price to pay for it. So I do kind of believe in the marketplace and the First Amendment as an American. I won't even begin to get in, because you've had the recent panels about what's going on in Japan, but, how many of you really want the government having more in an involvement in deciding what should be reported or what not? It's a slippery slope, I think, to have the government in that particular space. Yeah.
Anybody else with a question? Here's your chance. Well, I know that there are some of the associate members are here probably wondering how you choose your stories, for instance. How does that happen? Is it always news? I mean, you do a lot of feature work as well, right?
Yeah, sometimes they choose you because something happens and you have to go out and report it. Like when this blast happened in Bangkok, I was sitting in the bureau and I heard an explosion. And I actually thought it was a one-off thunderclap. And then I was on Twitter, and a friend of mine was in a hotel at the Erewhon Hotel next door and said, this looks like we think a transformer blew up. Then he said, no, they're keeping us in the hotel. Maybe something's going on. Then conveniently my videographer was there, so I said, it's a 7-minute walk. Let's just go see what's going on, because it started to look ominous. So a lot of times the stories choose you. Something happens, I'll see on Twitter, a huge typhoon is coming somewhere. Let's get in place to cover these things. Once in a while, editors will have what they think are great ideas to cover things, and you go back and forth with the editor about whether you think it's a great idea or not. And so sometimes I'll cover stories that editors think are great ideas, but most of the time I want to come up with my own stories. And some of my most popular stories have been wacky feature stories, which I love doing too. I did something a few weeks ago with firemen in Bangkok who round up snakes. And if you know Bangkok, they get really big snakes. Not cobras, but they get the pythons, yeah. And so, I did a TV story with pythons, and actually my hand still hurts. I didn't get bit, but it wrapped itself around me, and I did injure my hand a little bit. So, yeah, I think as a part of being a reporter is you've got to have creative thoughts. You've got to be able to come up with your own stories, or else you're going to be at the mercy of editors. I don't like to be at the mercy of editors.
Well, how about do business people ever come up to you, or companies come up to you and say, hey, we've got this great product coming out, or we've got an event happening. How about covering it?
Sure. I mean, I get probably about 300 emails a day, and probably 10% are coming from public relations people, whether they're working, a lot of them working for NGOs. So they're on things in the region that I cover. Whether it's about malaria reduction or child malnutrition or human rights, I probably get 100 a week. And sometimes I'll pick up on these, especially when it's like an embargoed report and I can do it ahead of time and I know we can release it right when it's coming out. I don't like to be behind, if it's already been out, it's like if it's already been on the AP, Reuters, Wire, why do I need to cover it if I don't think I can really enhance it in any ways? Products, usually I'll spot something that I'll think is really, really cool, and because it hasn't had any publicity, then I'm kind of interested in doing it. I think that is more normal. Say you're covering consumer electronics, or you're covering the automotive industry, then you're going to have that type of engagement with PR people in corporations pitching you on their projects and products, and it may be legitimate for you to act on those. But for me, it's got to be something. Is it something that's going to have renaissance with a global audience, especially people in the developing world? That's how I'm looking at stuff. Obviously, the fact that, if Rolls-Royce says that they're coming out with a hybrid car, yeah, that's kind of interesting. And maybe you can say it's aspirational for a lot of people in the world, but is it the first type of story that I'm going to cover on my particular beat with my particular type of audience? No. Now, if somebody comes out and says, we have a car that's going to run on biofuel, that's really interesting to me, because that's news that people can use in the developing world, right?
I see. Okay, thanks. All right. Anybody else have any questions? If no, yes, no, yes, no. Okay. All right. Let's wrap up. Everybody's good. Steve's getting hungry. Okay. But Steve, yeah, no, thank you so much for coming today. And I wanted to give you our 1-year honorary membership.
Well,
so please come as often as you can.
This is a bit of a faux pas, because as a former president, I'm already a lifetime member of the club, so what I've been given is worthless, unless I'm able to transfer it to somebody else.
Well, let's think about that for a minute. Anyway, thank you so much for coming.
You're welcome. Sorry, didn't mean to...